when we actually ignore the plight of the people that we might not be as familiar with, we actually allow something much, much worse to take place. And that is the absence of humanity. My name is Yasmin Ullah. I am a Rohingya. I was born in northern Rakhine State. I left in 1995, and I was stateless. And we were, in Thailand for about 16 years, and we didn't really have legal status there. So there was a lot of struggle and challenges that we face as refugees without the state protection. And fortunately, we were helped by a group of Canadian and missionaries. And then we were sponsored to Canada in 2011. I found my passion in activism and advocacy because of a situation that happened in 2017 where my family were forced to leave from their own villages due to the military crackdown and the campaign of violence that were launched by them. And I realized that at that point, I cannot afford silence. I needed to do more, anything at all that I could do to raise awareness and to get people as angry as I am. And so the situation of the Rohingya started out, a few decades ago, actually, since the military coup took place in 1962. Since then, the military has launched various different violent campaigns and military crackdown on the population. We are a group of religious and ethnic minority and indigenous people to Rakhine State of today. And we have various different, complex history. And since 2011, the de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, since her release from the house arrest, we're still seeing the same sort of disenfranchisement. The situation escalated in 2017 where the military crackdown took place, and there was a lot of people who were killed, raped, tortured, and slaughtered and dismembered. There was a lot of sexual and gender-based violence, which rendered 740,000 people to leave Myanmar and cross the border, cross the river without any assistance or aid because it all happened really quickly. And they all crossed into the border of Bangladesh and remained there ever since. And the situation within Myanmar, although there are just 600,000 Rohingya left within Rakhine State at this moment, the military has not eased off their persecution of the Rohingya. And unfortunately, the civilian government that was led by the NLD de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi, she also did not address the issue of Rakhine State or of the identity of the Rohingya, and actually branded us as Bengali or the outsider, not belonging to the Rohingya or not belonging to the 135 ethnicities that exist within Myanmar. And most of our land that was dispossessed have been developed into new economic zones for foreign investments. And all of the money are going back into helping the general get richer. So I started out not really knowing what I was getting myself into, and didn't really have anyone to guide me through the process either. And it was all about, I needed to make noise and I needed people to hear the story that comes from a Rohingya person and not just from various different journalists, basically interviewing experts who are not really from the community and really have no connection to the community and really don't feel the impact the way I do or other Rohingya would. And that was all the baseline of how I got started. I really didn't know what activism was, but I just wanted the world to know our plight and want to push them to do something. But I I found myself doing various different interviews with radio show, and started to fundraise for people who are displaced within Myanmar right after the military crackdown in 2017. So through that, I was able to find other connections with Canadian activists from various different places across Canada. And I joined an organization called Rohingya Human Rights Network. And we started to work on, communicating with the government officials and members of parliament to raise an awareness on the Rohingya issue and how pressing it is. So we spoke with various different government officials. We spoke with the Global Affairs Canada. We organized a lot of protest and a lot of various different, action forum here and there. And it all came together when we started to push the Canadian government to use the correct term. We continuously used the term genocide to describe the crimes that was inflicted upon us. It was slowly being received as any bureaucracy works. It took some time, and we worked really hard alongside with great partners, especially from civil society groups in Canada. And we were able to push for a motion, and a motion was passed unanimously in both the Senate and the House of Commons to declare genocide determination of the Rohingya case. And since then, we've pushed for the Canadian government to do more, and we were able to, make enough noise that the Canadian government felt pressured enough that they joined in on the case that was brought by the Gambia on the suspicion that the genocide happened, to the Rohingya people at the hands of the Myanmar authority, both the military and the civilian government. Apart from that, we also work on the public awareness campaign. The various campaigns that we worked on, specific ones were with various museums, specific exhibition and genocide learning tool, in order to basically educate the public that genocide is still happening to this day, and we all have a duty to actually uphold this international standards that it should not happen anywhere anymore in this century. What we did was, as the Rohingya Canadian community came together, we did a project with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and it was the exhibition called Time to Act Rohingya Voices. And part of that exhibition was oral history. And I happened to be honored to do some of the interviews here. And we had 5 interviewees, including myself, and we talked about our journey, our persecution, our journey, and how we came to Canada, and what is it like to live here now in Canada in our new home. That was, I think, the most impactful part of the exhibition, because it contains a lot of our own voices, authentic voices. And I was the one who interviewed the participants, not the museum curator. And it gives that authentic, connection to the people, because I can empathize with them and they can feel the emotion, running through. Also, we did the genocide learning tool with the Montreal Holocaust Museum. That was basically to put a little bit of a comparison between the Holocaust and how the disenfranchisement, the otherizing process happened during the Holocaust, as well as the otherization of the Rohingya within the Myanmar context. And I've used some of my relatives' example, and it is used now. It is available on the website of the museum to be used as a tool for genocide studies for teachers across Canada. And I think those were 2 very, very important projects that I've involved in, and it sort of really helped me grounded myself as an activist to be able to understand that it is not just the it is not just the state or the government or the members of parliament or the people in the position of power that will be able to help create change. Yes, of course, they will have, direct impact on making actual decisions that can impact people's lives, but it is almost, it is actually not almost, it's actually as important for the public to be aware of the situation around the world, of the plight of the Rohingya, of the plight of the people in various different ethnic communities in Myanmar, and what they have to go through in order to get by. Because without the pressure from the public, there is very little chances that the government will move or the bureaucracy will work in our favor. I have traveled around the world a little bit more in the past year to visit the camps and to speak at the European Union. I also, went to the State Department, and I did a little bit of a work advocacy at the Capitol Hill in the US. And we had events, and we try to keep our momentum going in terms of the international attention on the Rohingya's plight, even if there was not an actual gruesome, cruel type of incident that take place, because on a day-to-day basis, the genocide impact is still being felt by the people. Basically, I'm trying to shift the perspective that Rohingya in the camps are not just refugees or survivors of genocide, they're also a human resource. If and when they're given the skills and access to education and access to empowerment, but before they could even get there, they have to stop surviving. Because at this point, my people are just putting on a mode to live on a day-to-day basis. When you're given rice once a day, and the rations are not enough for your family, all that you can think of is food. And in order to be able to be empowered, those kind of basic needs have to be met first. And the reason why I started to call on various different aid organization or whenever I make policy recommendation, I ensure that I emphasize the need for the Rohingya to be able to represent themselves. I realize that sexual and gender-based violence is understood in a very, very limited sense. And I started a webinar series called Rohingya Women Webinar Series. And the first one we had was in July, and we're continuing to do so. We're going to have another one sometime this year, and possibly a few more actually. But what we focused on was the concept of Rohingya women speaking for themselves and actually speaking about how they could address the issues of, the gendered effects of genocide. And it was a really, really successful webinar. We had, well over 10,000 views for the first day on Facebook Live. That was really, really interesting. And the webinar seats where we have, the limits number, all of that was, we were overbooked as well. And it was quite heartening, because we didn't really understand or realize that there was a lot of interest in hearing our voices and having a panel that was just women talking about the issues that affect us. And the gendered issues are not just women issues, right? Everything can be gendered. Genocide is extremely gendered, because when the military came and actually launched the campaign, the crackdown, they specifically chose to make sure that the women are near the areas that the men are being slaughtered at the same time, so that they can witness and hear the voices and hear everything, so that they carry that trauma to pass on to the next generation, and we would not be able to at least go back, or we would not be able to live in peace wherever we are. And that's sort of the success that the military junta had. But without being able to acknowledge that the generational trauma is very gendered, but at the same time, the conditions of living within the camps is not conducive to, gender equality at all. Women still have to fear kidnapping, sex trafficking, human trafficking, and sexual and gender-based violence that happen on a day-to-day basis in the camps. And so making sure that the international community thinks of genocide as something very, very gendered and address the issues that come with that lens was something that I continuously work on currently. The other really, really important projects that I'm working on really passionately is the building of allyship among Rohingya youth and ethnic communities youth, including the Burmese youth from within Myanmar. And we've been working on this project called Bridges Myanmar. This is by ALTCN, organized by ALTCN, and I serve as the part of the committee. And we basically convene every Saturday to talk about various different issues, especially human rights violations that the Myanmar military inflict on various different ethnic communities, because all of these are youth leaders and student activists who are representing various different ethnic communities. So we come together and talk about the issues, have presentations, have guest speakers from various different organizations, specifically human rights organizations and civil society groups. And we convene to have a dialogue and get to connect with each other and understand that we will exist alongside each other, and being able to connect on a deeper level, on a human level, and being able to continuously see each other and not alienate the other person, but put the name to the face was really humanizing in a lot of ways, because at the beginning we had a little bit of hostility from some different groups because of the years of propaganda and years of hate rhetoric that ingrained within the very, very various nooks and crannies of the country. But as the time goes, as the time progresses, we see the shift and the changes in the tone and the mindset, and I think that's very provide a really, really hopeful image of what Myanmar can achieve if this was implemented in a wider sense. As I didn't have a background in how to do activism. I did not have a lot of knowledge in going into it, but I learned through the process, and it took a lot of learning to write an email to a parliament member. That was something that people train to do, and to speak in front of a public when I was really anxious. That's also something that I had to learn to do, to organize protest. All of this is a process and a huge learning curve for me, but also the idea that our resistance to oppression that happens elsewhere might not be taken as a priority in Canada or elsewhere that is far removed from the situation. Making a case for people to care is always difficult. The other part of this that I found quite challenging, and I'm still dealing with that, is the gender bias that exists, not just in the advocacy realm where people are from various different ethnic backgrounds, but within my own community. There is a lot of gender stereotypes and a lot of learning that we need to do, a lot of dialogue that we need to have, it's almost always that we're sort of pushed into the back, and there are certain times that they're going to call on us and say, oh, this is a women's issue, why don't you talk about it? It's just unfair for the most part, because when we have to rebuild our community, it will have to be, both men and women, and whoever is willing to come together to actually rebuild. So apart from the gender aspect of it, our community, the Rohingya community, is quite fragmented. We are all over the world. There's no one location apart from Bangladesh and probably Southeast Asia in general that sort of unify us in a sense. And there's so many, with the fragmentation, there comes different sort of adoption of identity too. So there are cultures that we adopted later on in life that sort of changes us in a way, and really sometimes it becomes a barrier in our communication. And so navigating that becomes a little bit difficult. But I also place my hopes in the building of allyship. As hard as the work is, I am hopeful that we would be able to at least not look past the differences, but actually look toward what unify us in the first place. And I think that the challenges like this are very common in probably in all of the activism and in other topics and other people as well. So it's I know that at least if I feel that I'm walking on this path alone, there are probably 1,000 other people who are walking on their separate path, just together at the same time. So that gives me a little bit of hope.